She didn't just laugh. She made sure everyone heard it. Ethan Calloway felt the room shift before he even looked up. The kind of shift that doesn't come from noise, but from attention. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A few heads turned. A few eyes lingered. And then came the sentence that would stay with him far longer than the meeting itself. He's only here because of me. It wasn't said quietly. It wasn't said casually. It was delivered with a smile that carried just enough confidence to make it believable. Ethan didn't react immediately. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even look at her right away. Instead, he let the silence sit. Because in rooms like this, in places like Westbridge Consulting Group, tucked inside a polished glass building in Greenwich, Connecticut, reactions were currency. And Ethan had learned a long time ago not to spend his too quickly. Across the table sat Sloane Harrington. Polished, sharp, perfectly composed, except for the faint trace of amusement still lingering at the corners of her lips. To anyone who didn't know them, it might have looked like a harmless joke. But Ethan knew better, because Sloane wasn't just a coworker. She was his girlfriend, or at least she had been something close to that. The line between personal and professional had blurred months ago, somewhere between late-night strategy calls and quiet dinners that felt more like negotiations than dates. At first, it had worked. They understood each other's ambition. They moved at the same pace. They spoke the same language: performance, results, leverage. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Sloane began to treat proximity like ownership, and Ethan began to notice the subtle ways she positioned herself as the reason for his presence. The truth was more complicated than that. Ethan had been recruited into Westbridge long before Sloane ever joined the firm. His track record spoke for itself. His clients stayed. His numbers held. But Sloane had a different kind of influence. She knew how to command attention. She knew how to shape narratives. And most importantly, she understood how perception often mattered more than fact. So when she laughed that day, it wasn't accidental. It was calculated. The meeting continued. Slides moved forward. Voices filled the room again. But something had changed. Because once a narrative is introduced, it doesn't disappear easily. It lingers. It grows. It settles into the minds of people who weren't there for the full story. Ethan stayed composed. He contributed when necessary. He kept his tone even. But internally, he was already recalculating. Not emotionally. Strategically. Because this wasn't about embarrassment. It was about positioning. And positioning in a place like this determined everything. After the meeting, as people filtered out in small clusters, Ethan remained seated for a moment longer than usual. Not because he was shaken, but because he was thinking. Sloane approached him casually, as if nothing significant had happened. "You're overthinking it," she said, her voice light. "It was just a joke." Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, he noticed something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. She believed what she had said. Not entirely, but enough. And that was the problem. "Was it?" he asked quietly. Sloane shrugged. "You know how these rooms work." "Yes," Ethan replied. "Edo." And that was exactly why he didn't let it go. Before we go further, drop in the comments and tell us. Do you think Ethan should have confronted her right there, or stayed quiet like he did? Because what he did next wasn't immediate. It wasn't loud, and it definitely wasn't emotional. It was patient. Over the next few weeks, Ethan shifted his approach. He stopped relying on shared visibility with Sloane. He began taking on projects that positioned him independently. He requested to lead presentations solo. He reinforced relationships with senior partners directly. Not aggressively, not defensively, but deliberately. At the same time, Sloane continued exactly as she had before. Confident, charismatic, comfortable in the belief that she controlled the narrative. And for a while it worked. People associated them together. People assumed overlap meant dependency. But slowly, something else started to happen. Ethan's work began to speak in rooms where Sloane wasn't present. His decisions started influencing outcomes she wasn't involved in. His name appeared in conversations without hers attached. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. But it was undeniable. Then came the turning point. A major client, one of the firm's largest, requested a restructuring of their account leadership. It was an opportunity. the kind that shifted internal dynamics overnight. Sloane expected to lead it. She had the visibility. She had the confidence. And, in her mind, she had the positioning. But the decision didn't go the way she expected. The senior partner, Nolan Prescott, made the announcement during a leadership meeting. Ethan will take point on this. No hositación. No explanación. Just clarity. The room absorbed it quietly. And for the first time in weeks, the narrative shifted back. Sloane didn't react immediately. But the change in her posture was subtle and real. Because now, the same people who had heard her joke were watching something else unfold. Reality. After the meeting, there was no laughter. No casual dismissal. Just silence between them. You planned this, Sloane said eventually. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, I adjusted. And that was the truth. He hadn't tried to undermine her. He hadn't attacked her reputation. He had simply removed himself from the version of the story she had created and let reality do the rest. But consequences don't stop at professional shifts. They bleed into personal spaces too. The distance between them grew. Conversations became shorter, less personal, more careful, because once respect is questioned publicly, it becomes difficult to rebuild privately. Sloane wasn't a villain. She wasn't malicious in the way people expect. She was ambitious, proud, used to controlling perception, and she had underestimated the cost of one moment. Ethan wasn't perfect either. He had ignored early signs. He had allowed boundaries to blur. He had assumed understanding where there should have been clarity. And now, both of them were facing the result of that. Before we close this, tell us honestly, if you were in Sloane's position, would you have apologized or doubled down on your stance? Because not every story ends with reconciliation. Some end with quiet separation. Weeks later, they sat across from each other one last time. Not in a meeting room, not in a workspace, but in a quiet restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina, where the conversation finally became honest. This isn't working, Sloane said. Ethan nodded. I know. There was no argument. No raised voices. Just two people recognizing that something had shifted beyond repair. They finished dinner. They paid separately. And they walked out without looking back. Because sometimes the most defining moments in a relationship aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet decisions that follow. And for Ethan, it was never about proving her wrong. It was about no longer needing to.